Well, thank you very much for having me. And also thank you to Mikael Linden. I saw he's on the attendees list and he's a colleague of mine from the AARC project. So hopefully if anybody has any questions that are more in what he's been working on, he'll be able to help us out. So looking at the list of attendees, I don't recognise very many names at all. So I'm going to assume you have a very basic knowledge of the AARC project, and we'll go into a little bit of detail about what that is, and then talk a bit about the policy and best practice harmonisation work package, which is where we're doing our assurance work. We'll be looking at just two of those tasks within that work package today, which is minimum level of assurance and certify for security incident response. And then I'll spend a couple of minutes at the end just talking about a bit of a spin-off activity that Mikael and myself have going on in terms of self-assessment and how we're actually planning to record the adoption of these assurance profiles. AARC itself is the Authorization and Authentication for Research and Collaboration project. It's European Commission funded and it is Europe focused, but a lot of the work that we're doing has much more of a global scope about it. So hopefully it's relevant for all of you across the pond. And it's 2 years. We've just completed the first year, 1 year left, and there are 20 partners from national research and education networks, e-infrastructures, libraries. I'm personally representing CERN and the WLCG, so a research infrastructure. And we have people from most of the larger research infrastructures based in Europe, which is incredibly helpful for completing these tasks. And what AARC is aiming to do, we're not aiming to build new things, we're aiming to build upon existing frameworks and services to really get them up and running. There's a lot of technology out there, and we don't want to be reinventing the wheel. Just trying to make sure that it works as designed, because currently there are a few blocks. So the AARC vision, a little quote from the management side, is to create a future in which e-infrastructures and new research collaborations cooperate seamlessly on top of a scalable and interoperable AAI, which puts it quite nicely, if there are fairly high number of buzzwords. So as I said, it is European focused, and even then there are many moving parts. We've got over 30 national federations within EduGain, a subset of those are European. There's a huge amount of participants, both organisations and individuals. So a key aspect for us is that we need to ensure that any policies or technical changes are easy to adopt, legally acceptable, which is tricky in Europe. I'm sure you've all been following the data protection changes that have been going on. So legally acceptable is not always a simple concept. And we also need things to be financially beneficial, hopefully, or neutral, since we are mostly non-profit organisations, all in research and education. The fun won't stop in theory, so we've submitted the AARC2 project proposal for another 2 years, 2017 to 2019, and the number of partners has grown, and we're focusing more on users. Most of the work that we're doing at the moment has been included in the AARC2 proposal. So it's all a work in progress, and we have a sort of 5-year plan going on. AARC is structured around 3 sectors. So we've got architecture design, policy and best practice harmonisation, and pilots and results validation. And then surrounding all of this, we have training and outreach. So one of the main focuses is actually to get the information that we acquire and we write down to the federations, regardless of whether they're involved in the AARC project directly or not. This slide I've taken from David Grupp, who is the work package leader, for the policy and best practices harmonisation work package. And he's come up with a few questions of what actually we want to handle within this work package. So really the top 2 are the ones that I'll be talking about today. So what does assurance mean, to whom, how much differentiation of LOA can people handle? And then the second is, how can we address incidents that propagate through the federated space? There's a lot of interesting work going on in this work package. If anyone's interested, I can send around links to the wiki and the website for AARC, etc. So just let me know. We're also talking about scalable policy, third parties, accounting, data protection. So some big questions and some meaty work. So the tasks themselves were chosen around perceived policy gaps, which were identified jointly by e-infrastructures, research infrastructures, NRENs, individuals. We're working very closely with RAFEDs and other communities working around Federation. Géant, for example, is very present in the project. So we've come up with 6 tasks. And I do need to clarify at this point when we're looking at the first one here. So delivery of an assurance baseline and differentiated assurance framework. So when we're saying this is an assurance gap, we're completely aware that there is a lot of excellent work going on. So for example, at Kantara, at Swamid, various other places that have implemented assurance profiles, but we're approaching this in a slightly different angle, which I'll come on to in the next slide. The other blue square here is to enable consistent handling of security incidents when federated access is enabled. So I'll just be talking about these 2. Could go on all day, but things to do, people to see. So these 2 assurance gaps. The first one, common baseline level of assurance. So like I said, there are multiple level of assurance profiles. They tend to be localized and they tend to require considerable negotiation to adopt based on what the stakeholders recognized at the time when we started AARC. And one question that people began to ask was based on empirical studies, so actually looking and interviewing people and looking at the existing infrastructures we have, what is a reasonable baseline of assurance to expect from research and education IDPs? So this is Mikhail's task. I've got a couple of slides on this, but if anyone has more questions, then hopefully he'd be happy to answer. The second task is the one that I'm leading, which is security incident response. And what we're asking ourselves is, can we actually facilitate collaborative incident response? And more difficultly, is there a way to make this attractive to participants? Normally, anything outside the direct remit of someone's job description takes a back seat, and that's exactly what we want to avoid in federated incident response. So for the minimum LOA, Mikhail interviewed 6 research infrastructures, including WLCG, where I am, and 2 e-infrastructures, EGI and Prace. And the results are here in the Géant wiki page. So it was questions to start off with, just to describe the infrastructure, the organization, who are your users, how much variety is there, do they come and go with a certain turnover, etc., etc. And then more assurance-based questions, such as, do you require face-to-face identity vetting? Can accounts be shared? I'd recommend taking a look at the interview results because there is some variation and it's an interesting study. So out of this, after much analysis, there were 6 requirements that came out for a baseline minimum LOA. So firstly, that the accounts in the home organisations must belong to a known individual. No shared accounts, library accounts, no accounts belonging to machines. They must be traceable to an individual. Persistent user identifiers. This is actually quite tricky in practice, as I'm sure you've also experienced. To have a non-reassignable unique identifier, even within an organisation, is not always trivial. The communities also highlighted the fact that documented identity vetting procedures were required, but these don't have to be face-to-face. It could be scans over email. And passport authentication with some good practices. Not too fussy there, but certainly not demanding second factor or anything more stringent than just a password. communities highlighted that they wanted the departing user's eduperson affiliation to change promptly. So if somebody leaves, they need to really leave, and that needs to come across through Federation. In terms of how an organisation would assert this, people agreed that self-assessment was actually sufficient. We don't need peer reviews. Self-assessment is fine. As long as there's training involved, then this is acceptable. Again, the report on this is available on the Géant Wiki, so take a look. And the question now is really, what are the next steps? So this report has been quite widely circulated and has had some very good feedback, very useful feedback. And now what Mikhail and colleagues' task is to really put this into Edugain and get this off the ground. So they've proposed a REFEDS working group to move this work along. And it's likely that each minimum LOA requirement will be a separate entity category. In that way, people will just be able to add entity categories. Yeah, I've just seen your comments. They're quite funny. Perfect. Okay, so that's all I have on minimum LOA. Hopefully you'll have some questions for Mikhail at the end. So if we take a step back and look at the chain of assurance, thanks whoever muted, and look at the chain of assurance across Edugain. And we can start on the left over here with the end user. And so between them and the home organisation, they have identity vetting. Home organisation to IDP, they'll have a policy for attribute release. And then between the IDP and the federation, there'll be a federation contract. You make the bridge with Edugain to the second federation, where again there are federation contracts in place, etc. And the question that David's asking in this slide is, where does incident response fit? Can we assign it to specific entities? Do we need to spread it everywhere? How do we get people to agree to the same actions? And it's not an easy question. So the problem is that clearly this is an inviting vector of attack. If you have one account, then you can access up to thousands of service providers. And this is inherent to what Edugain is and what Federation is. But the issues regarding security incident response should not be a reason to stop the success of Edugain. This is something that we can address. So I'll be coming on to that. Another important fact is that within an organisation or even a national federation, there'll normally be a centralised help desk. And the lack of a centralised support system within Edugain is an identified risk. And we need people to collaborate during incident response, which may well be outside their remit. So people have very little responsibility within this problem. We ran a very interesting workshop at ISGC last month, so the International Symposium on Grids and Clouds in Taiwan, where we had about 15 people in the room, some people being SPs, some people being IDPs, federation operators, an Edugain representative, etc. And we simulated an incident. And this was the exact problem that everybody said, oh no, that's not my job, and just sort of passed the buck around. And we see it in practice as well in operational security here. It's very difficult to get people to work together. So that's the crux of the problem that we're facing, really. And it does seem like common sense. It should work. If people are decent people, it should work. So an SP notices suspicious jobs executed by a handful of users from an IDP. And they would notify the IDP, who would then begin investigation, identify maybe over 1,000 other compromised accounts, take a look at where those accounts had accessed, and then notify those service providers. In that way, the information is shared with the people to whom it matters, and the recovery process can begin. But in practice, it's not always that simple. So there can be a multitude of reasons why it doesn't work, but these are 4 that we've seen in practice. So maybe an SP doesn't share details of a compromise because of fear of damage to their reputation. And potentially an IDP who's small scale or vaguely new might not have the capability to block users or trace their usage. Often logs aren't kept or aren't useful or aren't allowed to be shared. And then we come to the communication itself. And currently, nobody in this scenario here is bound to abide by any confidentiality protocols. So there's always the risk that sensitive information will be disclosed. And probably the biggest issue of all is, who do you contact? In standard metadata within Edugain, there is no security contact. This has been addressed in Common, which is incredibly helpful, and we've based a lot of what we've been doing on that. To summarize the solution, maybe. So we have an inviting vector of attack, and we have an uncertainty in the security capability of participants within Edugain. And this has developed a lack of trust. People are either not joining Edugain or opting out, and it's blocking the full capability of Edugain. On one side, attacks are inevitable. We're seeing them already, and we're pretty sure there will be some fairly high impact attacks in future. But on the other hand, we can make security capability transparent and start building these relationships between organizations and people. I keep looking at the chat. Yeah, basically, what we're looking at is a typical cert and confirm, potentially. We have spoken to confirm, and maybe I'll come back to that at the end. It's an interesting discussion. But anyway, we need a trust framework. So to give you the context, this is kind of the timeline of what's been happening around Certify. So in 2012, FIM4R, which is Federated Identity Management for Research, so that's a group of research infrastructures, I think they're mostly European. They wrote a paper on what requirements they saw within federated identity management in the future and potentially what needed to be addressed. The Security for Collaborating Infrastructures group then took this paper and built the beginnings of requirements for a trust framework in 2013, actually at ISGC as well. And then this was all picked up by RefEds in 2014 and became a working group. When the AARC project started, that work was then shifted to AARC, and we've been trying to push that forwards, which culminated in Certify version 1 being published in January of this year. And now we're beginning first round of deployment. So finishing off all the preparation and almost ready to go. Hopefully after we've done the first round of deployment, we'll then go for RFC, and that will probably coincide with AARC 2. And then there'll be continual deployment after that, if it goes as planned. So FIM4R, the issue of incident response was raised by IT leaders in this range of research facilities, and they're all facing similar challenges. So they prepared a document that contains all of these requirements. It's quite long, but it's very thorough. And I've just picked out 2 quotes here that focus on security. So the first one is about the shift in responsibility. It's saying today, each resource provider or service provider is responsible for terminating access by known compromised identities. And with identity federation, this responsibility will be shifted to the IDP, although the SPs will still want to be able to block access. And the other one here, so I've just said that it's for high energy physics, but it's really shared. And that identity federation for high energy physics would rely on having a well-defined framework to ensure trust and security. So based on this, and thanks to David Kelsey for this slide, some of the people within the FIM4R group then took this forward and built out actual requirements for a trust framework. And this is slightly larger in scope than the eventual certified document, and we've just picked out certain aspects. but it's really laid the foundations. I'll put a link here as well if you want to take a look. So this document coming from that group of people has now formed Certify, which is the Security Incident Response Trust Framework for Federated Identity. And where are we now? So we've articulated the framework requirements. This was basically done by that SCI group. And we've put the key ones together, the baseline that we want in security. And at the end of last year, we completed a community consultation, which hopefully some of you were aware of at the time through RefEds and other circles. And we published now Certify version 1. But I've ticked this, we've almost finished, maybe not quite, creating training material. And there's another community consultation to confirm the metadata extensions, which I'll come on to in a little while. And then after that, we'll begin adoption. And eventually we want to be able to support filtering based on Certify. So to have a subset of Edugain entities based on whether they're Certify compliant or not. So this is all in discussion with federation operators, or maybe it will be done on an organizational level. Questions for the future. So far, it's been quite an abstract concept, so I just wanted to put this slide in here to actually explain the content of the Certify framework. It's split into 4 sections. It's got operational security, requiring that an incident response capability exists with sufficient authority to mitigate, contain the spread of, and remediate the effects of an incident. For incident response, we need to assure the confidentiality of information exchanged, identify the people, and guarantee a response, which is tricky. You don't want to be talking to empty chairs. Traceability, so critical for actually recovering from an incident. We want to improve the usefulness of logs and ensure that they're kept in accordance with policy. And finally, participant responsibilities. We would like every end user to be aware of an appropriate AUP. Certify itself will be included in the form of 2 metadata extensions in an SP or IDP's metadata. And the first of these is a security contact. And this is basically the in-common security contact type, but we've decided to move it to a RefEds namespace. We'll probably be adding various other things into this namespace as time goes by. This will be the first. And the question here really is what to include. The specification is fairly flexible, but we have a few questions, sort of, do we want to include an individual email or a group email? And both have their merits. The general feeling is that we want to have a generic email as a bare minimum. In that way, we cover people being away, etc. 24-hour coverage in theory, or at least close to. But in practice, what we're seeing is that individual relationships and being able to talk to a known person rather than a generic email address is incredibly beneficial, and that helps build trust much more quickly. We also had the question of, do we want a telephone number in case critical infrastructure goes down, and would this help, or PGP keys, etc. As a bare minimum, this is what we're suggesting, the metadata at the bottom of the screen here, but it is flexible, so if people were particularly open to adding individuals, then there would be nothing to stop them. The other extension is expressing the compliance itself, which we've decided to do in the standard way, OASIS assurance certification. There should be no questions about this. And we've applied to register with IANA. Haven't heard back yet, but I hear that's not because it's a no, for maybe internal reasons. We have not heard back yet. So one of the things that we really wanted to do was to make this framework attractive, because security is not an attractive concept. It's normally seen as a block or just an annoyance. So this is really something that we wanted to highlight. So the overall aim of this will be that those organizations asserting certified compliance will be more trusted and will get more access or more users within Edugain. And this is where filtering on certified compliant entities will come into play. So for the IDPs, they should be able to gain access to useful services. And for the SPs, they should be able to gain users whose home organizations are certified, only allow authentication at certified compliant SPs. And the other benefit is that we will be able to guarantee an efficient and effective response from the partner organizations during incident response. And as a byproduct, we aim to raise the bar in operational security across Edugain, which is a fairly big aim, but shoot for the stars. So we now have a homepage on the RefEd site. So this is more the public facing, what is Certify, why should I join it, do I have any questions? And this in turn links to a technical wiki page that we've set up with a guide for Federation participants and a guide for operators. So I need to say thanks to Ioannis from GRNet in Greece for his help with this. So take a look at these two sites, and there should be enough information there to answer the majority of your questions, but I'm always open to questions, so just send me an email. The final point I wanted to briefly talk about is how we want to do self-assessment. So communities are happy with self-assessment. They were happy with self-assessment for minimum LOA. From the people we've spoken to, people are happy with self-assessment for Certify. But as long as the group is relatively small, and the Edugain world is not small, some use cases will require peer review. And the issue really is, as Edugain scales up, we're going to need some sort of automation to track self-assessment and to distribute it. And how do we ensure that the correct people complete the assessment? So just for numbers, currently there are 38 federations, 2,000 IDPs, 1,200 SPs. That's a non-trivial number, and we need some way of monitoring adoption across all of this. So what Mikhail, myself, and some other people started to think about at EWTI, so the European Workshop on Trust and Identity, last December, which is where I met Ruth, was for a self-assessment tool. And could we come up with something that would manage this for us, which had optional peer review, integration with SAML metadata directly, and could produce monitoring and audit? So we've done a software requirements document for this and circulated that within RefEd and within AARC. And the feedback has been generally quite positive, but we need to ensure that this design scales. And the complexity of organizations or SPs, IDPs, how they fit together, it's not always clear cut. And it's unclear where this tool or how this tool will be developed in the future. So we're looking to the next round of AARC and Géant. And this brings me to the end, really. I'm hoping you have a lot of questions. So just to conclude and to go over some of my key points, the AARC project aims to ensure that Identity Federation succeeds, both in technologies and policies. We're not building new things. We're trying to get what's already there working and sustainable. Taken measures to address perceived assurance gaps, and these were included in the policies and best practices harmonisation work package. Community-based interviews have defined a minimum acceptable level of assurance, and this will be the basis for an assurance profile. There is a clear assurance gap in federated security, which we're addressing by a trust framework, Certify. And finally, a self-assessment tool would prove valuable for multiple use cases and to scale adoption. And that's all I have to say. So thank you very much for listening and for the turnout. That's great. And would be very happy to answer questions.
This is really great stuff. This is Jamie Clark from Oasis. Thanks so much. And if somebody's managing the queue, I have a question when it's time for questions.
Jamie, it's Andrew Hughes, Vice Chair of the Kantara Identity Assurance Working Group. You are the queue. Please Anyone that's asking a question, please identify yourself and your organization, and please proceed. Go ahead, Jamie.
There you go. First of all, again, thanks very much, Hannah. This is wonderful stuff. And I just want to say I'm professionally involved with a number of very large networks of organizations attempting to do similar threat and incident response sharing across extremely well-funded, agencies with lots of CISOs and staff, and a very different case in terms of the humans than maybe what the average EduServe or InCommon participant has. And yet, honestly, they're facing all the same problems. I mean, the things you've said about the difficulty in making things happen, the absence of clear contact. I mean, really, I have to say, your pain points are not unique to the case of loosely coupled universities that only have so much time and energy to do this. And I just wanted to share with you that we hear this from much bigger and allegedly much more security conscious organizations as well. So bless you. Having said that, here's my question. I can imagine, as you describe the system you're creating, that you will have a point where a small number, but not a large number, of your correspondent entities participate in your federated system. So on day one, as they start to have the option to join essentially a federation, so that known contacts using known messaging structures and data stores across known levels of operational security, are running. Now on day one, you've got three, you've got Heidelberg Leuven and the City University of someplace doing it, and everybody else is still back on the send pieces of paper back and forth and see if someone answers your phone calls. So have you any? I mean, do you think? I'm just curious sort of how you guys see that happening as you transition from an automated system. And once you put the automated system in place, do you turn off the phone call network and say, if you want to know anything, you'll have to join us and get on the choo-choo train, or do we keep both of them running for a long time? I'm just sort of curious what the thoughts of the organization are about how the transition goes from one to the other.
So what you're talking about here is going from email to a more automated system of alerting people on compromised accounts. Is that what you're asking?
I think so. I'm thinking about the transition from the old system to the more automated one, and I wonder if you're just going to keep them both running for a long period of time, or what will move, or what's expected in that transition. Because that is a problem a lot of us have in similar federations, is we have this lovely new system and people can use it, but what's going to move them to actually learn how to do something other than email?
The same issue that we've had with ECP for the last however many years, and the take-up just doesn't happen. So this is a problem, and at the moment we haven't really begun deciding the route we want to go down, whether we even want to go down an automated route, because actually installing software at every entity within a federation is going to be incredibly slow uptake. People don't have the money, the legal capability, everything else that goes along with it. And so to ensure uptake of the framework itself, we need to set the bar very low. And at discussions that we've had about Certify, we've even said we don't want to force encrypted emails between participants.
Right.
So we want to set it right down to 0. And then eventually maybe we'll adopt something more automated. So Colin in the chat said confirm. And we actually had a discussion with confirm last October, which was very interesting. The problem for us is that we are not US based. And this all comes back to data protection and the fact that if somebody is identifiable as a unique person, it's very difficult to share the information. And hopefully somebody will come up with some fantastic law and policy to get around this, but it's going to be difficult. So anything automated, a large off button for an account which covers the entire federation, is going to be a very difficult tool to find.
And Hannah, you're talking about the company Confirm with a Y, that is an endemic pilot and uses some encryption, some part of which encryption may be subject to export restrictions. Gotcha. Forget the automation then. Let's put it a different way. If all that it requires to join your federation is to agree to certain levels of security assurance and known contacts and sort of to sharpen up your game, but still to only do it on email. What moves people to that? What gets, you know, the University of Leuven to come to you and say, right, I mean, do they get better data if they join the Federation? Are they going to get privy to things that they won't have if they don't? What's the bait, if you will?
So we need a carrot, right? We need to say, this is, you want this, you have to join Certify. And really the way we think we can do this is get the power players within the community to adopt Certify, filter Edugain based on Certify, and only allow Certify compliant people in. So for example, at CERN, we have users around the world at various universities. Once there's a critical mass of Certify compliant IDPs, we will implement that filter, and anybody from another university who's coming in will say, why can't I anymore? Go back to the university and say, you need to join this, I can't lose my access, was potentially one way of doing it. We need to be very careful not to completely disrupt collaborative research. But at the end of the day, it's the power players and research infrastructures who are going to have the sway.
Well, I could imagine reporting entities.
Sorry.
I could imagine reporting entities who are participants who certify saying, I'm willing to share more of my touchy secrets and incident responses with the certified group, right? I mean, maybe if you join that club, you're getting more data because you're getting data that the reporters aren't willing to provide outside of the higher security verified group, question mark. And Andrew, I'm done. I was just trying to figure out sort of what's the carrot. And this is a very helpful discussion.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the audience? I've got one if no one else does. Okay, hearing no others, I'll ask mine. Andrew Hughes from Kantara. My question is possibly strange, but bear with me. So we all know about federated identity, federated credentials, and I see on the conclusions page, federated security. In the research, have you started to see a separation of responsibilities and activities around proof of identity, forms of federated identity, versus the notion of federated security? Because your characterization of limits of responsibility within an organizational boundary is stark and distinct, I think, from the idea of either common security or federated security.
I see what you mean. So we're more talking about distributed security in that way.
And do you see, is there any hint at all of having a partially distributed, partially centralized security regime? Because, you know, coordination would be obviously easier, but centralizing it would be quite painful, I think. So
you mean to have a sort of like global CERT group, potentially, who would deal with all this and coordinate it and send out messages to everybody involved?
Yeah, I mean, or having a global one with distributions of smaller certs for specific federations or large institutions, that sort of thing.
It's certainly something we've discussed in terms of having a properly financed cert group. It might be difficult. So Edugain itself is a very skeletal service. It is just a broker for metadata, and we can't run a service with them. So this global cert group would have to be a collaboration between willing federations to join together, which might happen. Yes, it could happen, and that would be a fantastic thing. I think probably the more likely approach or more likely evolution that we'll see is security response trust groups. So these are vetted groups where you can only join when you've proved yourself and been added by a member. And this is where we get a lot of our intel from at CERN for security, for indicators of compromise, etc. And I imagine something like this might work quite well, and actually that would address the security side of it, the secure communication side of it quite nicely as well. a global or sort of structured cert would potentially be a very good way to ensure that this information is actually spread to the correct people. The logistics of doing it might be difficult, and I think we need to have a bit more of a think about it. So it was certainly something we were talking about 6 months ago, but conversation seems to have stilled for the time being. But it's a very good point.
And just a quick follow on, if anyone else has questions, just please speak up, and I'll cede the floor.
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead. Identify yourself and please go ahead.
Well, yes, thank you. This is Peter Alderman from Safe Biopharma Association. I had a question relating to the interaction between research institutions that are governmental entities or required to comply with governmental guidelines and standards and regulations, and those that are more autonomous with regard to this standard, this club that you're trying to put together. It seems to me that at least here in the States, there are a number of academic institutions which are either federal or state governmental entities, and they are required to manage and maintain certain privacy requirements based on that particular relationship. I don't know if it's the same in Europe. You could kind of clarify for me that collusion.
So generally in Europe, in the European Union, let's just focus on the European Union for the time being, there are common data protection laws which form the baseline. Some countries then go on to take those laws further, but on the whole, they're fairly common. You do get organizations like CERN, for example, who are international and are subject to international law and are not subject to any of these EU things. So we do have the same sort of problems. There is a code of conduct, which Mikhail has been working on as well, which is an effort within Europe to put a common baseline on privacy and protection. I don't know if you want to elaborate, Mikhail, if you're still there.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear?
Yes.
In Europe, the data protection directive is agnostic to the type of the organization, if it's public organization or autonomous university. I know in some European countries there are local laws which make a difference between public organizations or government organizations and universities. So it really depends on the country. So in principle, it shouldn't be an extra obstacle for organizations if one of the organizations is a government organization and the other is a university, but it really depends on the country.
Does that answer your
Mikhail.
question, Peter?
Yeah, if I may echo Andrew and do a quick follow-up. It seems to me that some of these institutional requirements are going to be or are already much more demanding than the set of proposals and agreements that you're trying to institute, and it sort of would seem to me to run the risk of creating a 2 or even a 3-tiered system of trust and security.
It is a risk, but generally within RNE, especially in Europe, we're very used to collaborating and compromising on these things. And a lot of communities have been involved in this, and the decision was made to go for just the baseline in security, because it's unfeasible to expect security experts at an SP that consists of 2 people, for example. So this this was considered at the very beginning, but I do see your point that, of course, certain institutions will have higher security requirements than others, but within a federated context, it's better to have the baseline than exclude everybody, was the feeling.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience before I ask Colin Wallace a question? Okay, actually, just looking at the time, it probably is time to wrap up the call. So once again, Hannah and Mikhail, thank you very, very much for presenting this, presenting to the group today. The group of credential providers, assessors, and Identity Federation experts. We're very interested in hearing about the work. And you'll notice a lot of downloads of the various research reports over the next couple hours, I'm sure. So with that, thank you very much. Any last comments?
Thank you very much for inviting us along. It's great to be able to share what we're doing with you guys over in the States and various other locations. So that's fantastic.
Colin here. Thank you.
I'd like to echo things as well, our thanks, and invite folks to our follow-on meeting of the IAWG in an hour. We're going to be discussing our approach to privacy criteria and looking at one of the criteria within the service assessment criteria that we use to evaluate CSPs. So the call starts in an hour, and I look forward to you. And again, thank you to everyone for attending today.
Was there contact information for Hannah given?
It's on the slides,
which are going to be circulated in some way. So maybe on the IAWG side or something like that. Thanks so much, guys. And Hannah, this is tremendously helpful, and it's very kind of you to take the time.
No problem. I hope it was useful.
Yeah. Very good.
Thanks very much.
We're done. Thank you, everyone. Bye now.